Okay. So, Rahul, your question was, I'm just repeating because we're going to record this now. That how come Aristotle, who is such an old person, is he contributing to hypertext fiction, which is so modern? It's a good question because it talks about how we teach literature. So, literature, how do we teach anything actually? Literature, history, or philosophy, or how do we do it? We begin from point zero and then we move to point one, point two, point three. So Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, these are important. These are not important. You can't let them go just because they're old people. You have to realize that Aristotle ने जो भी बोला, that has a huge impact on his followers, and then whatever his followers wrote was because of Aristotle, and then whatever those people, his followers के आगे followers wrote, for example the Renaissance scholars, so that was because of what was happening in the classical age. Then whatever was happening in the Renaissance then became a catalyst for what happened in the Enlightenment. Then that became a catalyst for the Romantics, and then that became a catalyst for Victorians. That led us to the modern era, and now we are in the postmodern era, or the post-colonial era, right? So everything is a chain reaction. Right. So because it started with Aristotle, that is why we're going back to the beginning, because he is the number one influencer. Right. His writing has influenced all of our writings, all of our ways of thinking, because that is how man has thought for so long. This is why it's important to go back to the basics, to go back to the beginning and see what Aristotle wrote all those years, all those thousands of years ago, and then see how we are moving away from it. If we are going to say that hypertext is a modern fiction thing, hypertext is something which is very new, it's very fresh, how do we say that it's fresh or new? Only by comparing it to something which is old or different from that. Right. So this is why Aristotle is important, because number one, the legacy of Aristotle has not vanished, even though we don't study Aristotle as much. His legacy has not gone. Whatever he said about plots, tragedies, histories, comedies is still studied and still practiced in how we write things. Number two, to situate something as modern or to situate something as postmodern, you must be situating it in regard to something else. Right. Now that relative question aa jata hai na ki this person is taller than that person. Right. There are two people, there are two points of comparison. So to find the second point of comparison for hypertextuality, we look back at the classical era. So this is why Aristotle's vision is important to understand how different hypertextuality is from his classical notion. Is that clear now?
Yes, ma'am, very much.
Okay. Anyone else? Anyone else has any questions?
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Ma'am, actually, I wanted to ask something which is related to your class as well as from Akshay sir's class.
Okay.
May I?
Of course.
Ma'am, actually, we discussed in the on the other day in his class that Catherine Hale says that electronic literature is something which is created by using computer commands, right?
Okay.
And ma'am, we know that we create hypertext fiction using HTML commands and other computer commands.
Mhm.
Ma'am, then why does she says that hypertext literature cannot be considered as electronic literature?
Okay.
I'm confused. Like we create both the literatures using computer commands only, and for both the things we have digital platforms only. Then why is it so that we cannot, while giving examples of electronic literature, we cannot include hypertext literature in that?
Okay. So as far as I have understood hypertext literature, it is not only the use of electronic technology that creates hypertextuality. So hypertextuality is the multiplicity of links, right? Connections are important in hypertextuality. Now, electronic literature is something that can be without connections also. If you're looking at electronic literature in the definition, like the definition that you've given is that electronic literature is something that we use by creating computer commands, then yes, hypertextual literature is computer based literature. But also remember the first point, that hypertextuality is more than electronic literature, because it is a series of connections, a series of relationships. Hypertextual literature has no beginning or end as such. This is something that we'll discuss today also. That it doesn't go with a beginning. You can enter a hypertext at any point in time and you can leave it at any point in time. There's no beginning or a conclusion. This is what Aristotle ke against jaake, this is what hypertextuality is, right? So hypertextuality is more than just computer commands. The second point is that also remember, Landau has argued that hypertextuality has precursors in very canonical literature also. So the last time that we talked about this last week, we discussed that hypertextuality is present in James Joyce. It is present in T.S. Eliot. Why? Because they use poetry or they use the writing of fragmentation to describe what they're doing. So even writing which is 100 years before the advent of computers or before the advent of digital technology, even like for Tennyson or for Joyce, that can also be considered hypertextual. But those writings will never be considered electronic, right? Because electronic writing ke liye you definitely need some kind of digital technology. So hypertextuality has precursors both before the digital age and obviously in the digital age. At the same time, hypertextuality is a series of connections, a series of links without a beginning or an end. So in those senses, it cannot be linked with Hale's definition of electronic literature. Right. But if you're just looking at electronic literature as something which is a digital command narrative, which uses digital technology, then yes, hypertextuality or some hypertextual fiction can be called electronic. Is this okay?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Any other questions? Any statement that you'd like to make? Maybe you read it. I'm saying maybe because I'm sure a lot of you have still not read or asked you to read. So if you've read it and you have any comments to make. Okay. Yeah,
Excuse
okay.
me,
Rahul, yeah.
can we also state this Aristotle portion in the chapter against the anti-hypothesis theory that they were arguing that we are going away from our ancestral things.
Can we argue what? I'm sorry. Aristotle is saying that we are going against ancestral things, or is someone else saying that?
No, like in the beginning of the hypertext, when some of the anti-hypertext theorists are against this hypertext thing, so we can use this Aristotle portion as a defense against them.
Okay, so you're saying that if somebody is against hypertextual fiction, then can we use Aristotle to defend their argument? That's what you're saying?
And defend ours that hypertext is not getting us away from our ancestral things, that it belongs to
हाँ,
us.
definitely. What you can always say is कि everything in literature is a reaction to something else. Right. So enlightenment के लिए reaction romanticism था, romanticism के लिए Victorian era था, modernism के लिए postmodernism था. Things there's always an equal and opposite reaction. You know, as physics told us in school. So in that sense, you can always say कि yes, we are deviating from Aristotle definitely in hypertextual fiction. There is a definite deviation because Aristotle says there should be definite plot, there should be definite structure, and hypertextual fiction just says कि no, necessarily plot nahi chahiye, necessarily structure nahi chahiye. So you can definitely say कि we are deviating from it. But because there is always a reaction towards it, you can deviate from point A only when you know where that point is, right? If you don't know where you're going from point A to point B, if you don't know where you're starting, right? I'm telling you that I'm moving towards point B, but you don't know where I'm moving from. So how will you know, right? What kind of relative distances between those points we'll never find out. So in that sense, you can always say कि, yes, we are deviating from Aristotle, but Aristotle will always remain the basis of our foundation. It will always remain the basis of it will always be the origin point, always be the originary point for how we understand literature. So in that sense, you can always say, yes, this might be a reaction to Aristotle, but we're not completely forgetting Aristotle, and we're not completely forgetting our ancestral roots, as you said. Is that okay?
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so everybody's here, I guess, and then we begin with the next section today, answering Aristotle. Last time we talked about this, answering Aristotle part. So yeah, let's start. Okay, answering Aristotle, hypertext and the nonlinear fraud. So the first thing he says here is just concentrate on the points that I'm writing. I did not add animations this time because sometimes it makes my computer and this entire PPT slow. So just focus on the points that I'm speaking. Don't be in a hurry to write everything down. Again, I will share it with you. Please remember that you have to understand the topic first before you can make notes on it. If I have to tell you, if I'm saying something and you want to write it down, be free. Make sure that you write it down, but focus on what I'm saying. Okay. So let's see. First point is that he in this section is going to say that linearity is a quality of experience within a single text block or a lexia, in that the reader follows a path through the lexia. The question of removing linearity is not to remove the sequence of events, but then how do we circumvent linearity? To understand this point, let us go back to our lectures last week. What did I say last week? I said that hypertext is a non-linear narrative, and we discussed this and we talked about this. Why was it a non-linear narrative? Because it had no proper beginning, because it had no proper end. Why did it have no proper beginning or end? Because you could enter a hypertext at any point in time and you could leave it at any point in time, right? So you could enter any hypertextual scenario, you could click any one of the links, you could go read something, click a different link, click a different link next time, and you would have a different narrative. In that sense, it wasn't single directional. It did not give you a unidirectional narrative. It went in multi-linear directions. Therefore, it was called multilinear. Right. So this is what we were saying last time. Now, however, he has a question. He says that, okay, we accept that Landau is arguing, we accept that hypertexts are multilinear in that they go in different directions. But he says that within a single block of text, there is one direction. Are you trying to, are you getting what I'm trying to say? That within a single block of text, within a single paragraph, you have one direction, not only one direction that you're reading from left to right, like I'm reading this complete paragraph. So if we are talking about this entire point here, right? We are reading this paragraph from left to right, that is obviously a direction, but he says that each single paragraph tries to make or tries to tell you a single narrative story. Single narrative story, not only in the sense of plot or characters, but also in the sense of a singular piece of information is being presented to you, in which you move from one direction to another. And now, because there's a singular piece of information presented to you and you're moving in one direction, therefore he says that linearity has not really left the text. Okay. So linearity has not really left the text in that way. Every block of text in a hypertextual fiction still has some aspects of linearity. That is, it moves in a single direction. It talks about a single narrative. In that sense, in that sense, he says that hypertextual fiction is not really multilinear. So now this might be a confusing point कि अब वो है multilinear कि वो नहीं है, and this is what we're going to discuss today. So keep your mind open. Right. The question of removing linearity is not to remove the sequence of events. So he now says, and he makes a very good point, I think, that just because we remove a beginning or we remove the end or we just mix all of this up does not mean that we have removed linearity. Because as I just said, each block of text has its own linearity. So linearity is not, it cannot be so easily removed, right? Then how do we circumvent linearity? How do we escape linearity? Because we keep on saying that hypertextuality is multilinear. So how is it truly multilinear? That is going to be his endpoint. Let's come to the second part. Robert Coover is a theorist who was working at Brown University in the States around 10 years ago, more maybe 10, 15 years ago, a decade or so, and that is where the digital humanities project really took off at Brown, and that is where hypertextual fiction really came into its own. So he held a workshop there and a lot of students participated and they created their own hypertextual fiction, which we're going to discuss some of it today. So Robert Coover is a very important voice in digital narrative fiction. Obviously, we in India are reading about this 10, 12 years later. But yes, this theory came around in 2006, 2008 when Landau wrote this book in 2006, right? So around that time, he was conducting a lot of experiments at Brown, and we'll talk about those later. But yes, so remember that this person is an important person, and you'll find a lot of mention of him later also. So Robert Coover says that linearity does not disappear with hypertextuality, but because hypertexts are multidimensional and theoretically infinite, Thus, hypertexts are not linear because they lead in many directions into many spheres and create an infinite set of possible network linkages. Let's try to understand this. Again, the point that he's making comes through is linearity. A hypertextual narrative, just because it's multilinear, does not mean that it's still not linear. Right. This is a crucial point that he's trying to make, that just because we are calling hypertextual fiction as multilinear fiction does not mean that there is no linearity in the text. Linearity exists within those text blocks, as I've told you, within one chapter, within one paragraph, within one stanza of poetry. There is always linearity, and that linearity is never going to go away. Right. How can you, if for example, if I say that linearity is going to go away if you maybe change the direction of language, if I start reading all these lines, backward, linearity circumvent to, how, then, this is not going to make sense, right? So if we are so hell-bent on removing linearity from hypertextual fiction, then that will mean that we compromise its meaning, its function, its form, and that is something that we should not do. So Hoover definitely argues that linearity does not disappear with hypertextuality, but because hypertexts are multidimensional, we already know that they are multilinear, then multidimensional. Multidimensional also in the way that they might use technology along with visuals and audio. So in that direction, also multidimensional and theoretically infinite. Infinite in the sense that there are an infinite possible number of narratives which is possible in a hypertext. So usually he is making this point about hypertextual fiction, but you can always keep in mind the example of Wikipedia, which is one of the biggest hypertext narratives in a way that we have. In that sense, that if you click on a Wikipedia page, you will find so many embedded hyperlinks in that page, which will lead you to something else, which will lead you to something else, right? So it theoretically, this kind of narrative is infinite. In that sense, a narrative that I showed you last week, inflections or infections, was also infinite in a way. So I urge you to go back to the set of links that I sent and look that up once you're going through this PowerPoint and find that you will not, there will never be a point where it will say that this is the end of the hypertext narrative. Right. So hypertexts usually do not have a definite conclusion, and in that way, they are theoretically infinite. This conclusion point is also something we'll discuss this week. So just keep it in your head for now. Thus, hypertexts are not linear because they lead in many directions into many spheres through an infinite set of possible network linkages. That is very self-explanatory. There are a lot of links, and they lead to other prospects. Uske baad, he's going to talk about the importance of the reader in this text. We've already, not we, but you must have already talked about Roland Barthes' notion of the readerly and the writerly text. So here, the readerly importance refers to not that notion. It's just a statement that he makes that the reader makes his own way in the narrative, and therefore they become reader authors. Right. So because here authorial intervention is really low, you are not going from one page to the next page to the next page. What you're actually trying to do is you're just picking random links. You're just making your own way. You're just trying to find your own path. And in that sense, we all become reader authors. Why are we reader authors? Because not only are we readers, but we also share the power of the author. Right. And this power of the author, this sharing of power of the author is something that does not happen. We don't snatch away power from them, they give that power to us. They authors empower readers in hypertextual fiction so that they can be reader authors, and we'll come to this point in a moment. But this, remember that this kind of power that we have to create narratives, to create different kind of narratives, to go anywhere in hypertextual fiction is not something that only that we take by force from authors. It is something that authors give to us through the use of links, through the use of images and visuals and different kind of embedded hyperlinks, right? So therefore, we become reader authors while we're reading the hypertext fiction and create new narratives, new structures, new storylines while interacting with authors and other authors. So for example, there is an example of hypertext fiction that we'll discuss today. So remember this point of interaction. The second, yeah, now. So this is what I was saying, that works with web systems that permit linkages, they add text, and few such works have been attempted. Remember that 2006 when he's writing, he can't find a lot of hypertextual fiction. So maybe he's talking about that. But today we have a lot of hypertextual examples that you can find online, and that I shared with you also present in the PPT, and you can just go through them. So you will find that the works which have links, which add text, which have images, which have audio sounds attached to them, they obviously are more interactive. Example I've given her inflection, so you can look that up. Now, Lindau's analysis kya hai Coover ka? So what does Lindau have to say about this? He says that hypertext software does not explicitly allow us to follow a character story exclusively. Remember that this book is from 2006, so he's talking about an era 14 years before. But I think this point holds true today also. If you're not only looking at hypertext fiction, maybe you're looking at just hypertextual digital narratives, even then you will find that you cannot just pick a character and follow their story. There's always a sense of frustration which accompanies the reading of any fiction, whether it's hypertext or whether it's print fiction, because you might like a character a lot, but you can't follow their story anywhere because the author has only permitted that character a certain amount of space, a certain amount of dialogue, and a certain amount of storyline. After that character's role is done, that character needs to go away or needs to fade into the background or needs to do something else. Right. So these, if you read a lot, then you will realize the frustration that I'm talking about, because sometimes you want to delve into character backstories, but you can't really do that because the author does not permit you to. So Landau says that hypertext fiction also suffers from the same problem in the sense that it does not allow us to pick just one character at random and go into it. So, for example, if a page of hypertextual fiction has 5 links on it, now I am saying that because of those 5 links, there is an almost infinite number of possibilities that you will click one link, it will lead you to 5 more links, and then 5 more links, and then 5 more links, right? So in that sense, the hypertextual fiction is theoretically infinite. But listen to this carefully. If I am saying that I just want to follow one of those links and I want to learn more only about that link, now that is something which is not possible. Why? Because the author has kept that power for himself by granting us access to only a certain amount of information, a certain block of text about that particular link. The author has blocked our way in accessing more information about that link or that character or that particular kind of storyline. So this is a problem which is present in both print and in fiction, in hypertext fiction, right? The second point here is that readers can enter the text freely. This we've talked about this a lot. The readers can enter a text freely. They can edit. Sometimes you can edit things. Sometimes you can delete other things. Now this specific edit delete wala example is in reference to Hotel. So Hypertext Hotel was a piece of hypertext fiction which was created at Brown University while Coover was giving his workshop there on digital literature. So he says Landau calls this a worthy experiment because it teaches us how sometimes Landau calls this like actually a cyber utopian experiment. He says that this is a utopian creation because it allows collaboration between people. So readers are not only readers, they're authors also because they're writing things, they're authors also because they're editing or deleting things. And Coover says that it's a failure because what really happened was that people just went in and wrote their own things and deleted other people's things. So it was a kind of vandalism for Coover to do this. It was a kind of thing where just aap jao or aap kisi ka bhi delete kar do. So it didn't like seem like a success to him. But Landau calls this a worthy experiment. I've shared 2 links here. If you don't look at any other link, I urge you to look at this link, the second link, the one in red, because this is a recreation. I could not find a hypertext hotel anywhere. Also because with changes in technology and with technology being outdated so quickly, we can't really find links. We can't really find links to a lot of hypertext that I would like to show you because those hypertexts are not available anymore or they've been archived and those archive links are not working. And it's not like we have a physical copy of these hypertexts, right? So we can't really access the physical copy. Everything is on the web, but I couldn't find it. However, some students at this university have recreated Hypertext Hotel and recreated this as a virtual reality game where you put those augmented reality wala goggles and then you just go into the game. So that kind of cyber real version they've created. So I urge you to look this up if nothing else. So in this way, I have told you about the first thing कि we cannot follow character story. Print में भी यही problem है, hypertext में भी यही problem है. Readers can enter the text freely, however, they can edit it, they can delete it sometimes, right? But the entering the text freely is a thing which is almost common to every text, every hypertext. Sorry. Third point is the problem of readerly choice. Now, do readers make an informed choice while following links in the work? Do authors prefer reader disorientation? Options like one-to-many links, link menus, path names provide authors power to empower the reader. Now, this is a question which is a $100 question here. Do readers make an informed choice while following links in a work? Now, this is a problem. See, I have been telling you from the beginning that readers create their own way. Why? Because if all of us are going to read one hypertextual fiction, none of us will follow the exact same path. You know, some sections of our paths might meet. Maybe we click on the same link a couple of times, but then we might choose a different link. We might choose a different link. So in that way, this is very random. But according to Landau, he raises a question. Even in hypertext, is it possible that authors can direct the way in which readers go through their texts? And this is a question that he does not answer. So I will leave that up to you. How much of the links you actually press in a hypertextual fiction or you click on in hypertextual fiction are your doing, and how much is motivated by that author through different kind of strategies that he's used. How much is the author really pushing you, and how much contribution your agency has to your pushing a link or your pressing a button. So think about that question, and we'll go on to the final part of this section. There is no ideal form of hypertext fiction. Okay. In the sense that if I'm talking about an adventure story, or if I'm talking about the Aristotelian tragedy, I know that there is a set pattern of events that needs to come, right? So in the beginning, a character will be happy in a tragedy. In the beginning, a character will be sort of happy, not like ecstatic, but he'll be happy and safe. And then in the middle, something will happen to him. Some kind of crisis will overcome his life and then overtake his life. Sorry. And then what will happen is that he is just going to fall into some kind of depression. There is going to be some kind of flaw that he has, which is going to bring his downfall. So in every Aristotelian tragedy, as emulated by Shakespeare in Macbeth or Othello or Hamlet, you see this upper niche, this mountain-like trajectory, right? In adventure stories also is the same thing. In the beginning, something happens, they go on an adventure, they learn things about life in that adventure, then they come back and they live happily ever after. Fairy tales also have the same story. Beginning, mein everybody is happy. Middle, mein something like some witch comes or something happens, and then in the end, happily ever after. So this kind of trajectory is followed for print fiction, but never for hypertextual fiction. Remember our lecture which discussed the second section where he said that hypertextuality is a diverse range of options, it's a diverse range of opinions, and it cannot be categorized into, it cannot be pigeonholed into genres or forms like we have done with print forms. I can tell you the story of any print form and it will usually relate to anything. So, for example, romantic fiction, adventure stories, building romance, tragedies, horror fiction. Every one of them has a particular set of circumstances. That is how we classify fiction. We know something is gothic or something is not gothic based on the presence of a castle, some kind of horrific tragedy, some kind of Byronic hero. So we know these elements. If I'm asking you to talk about romanticism, you're going to give me a set pattern of characteristics. Now, all of this is print form. All of this is in print. So Landau argues that there is no such ideal form for hypertextual fiction. There might be commonalities with how we describe hypertext. Obviously, there is a definition for hypertext. There is a set of characteristics which must be followed. But those characteristics can exist digitally, can also exist non-digitally, can exist in a combination of two, or might be scattered throughout some works of a particular author. So in that way there is no ideal form of hypertext fiction, and fictional hypertext can twist the author reader relationship for different purposes, modes and effects than illustrative hypertext. Especially we come to a point about fictional hypertext, because remember this is a chapter on reconfiguring narrative, which is in the first lecture we discussed and we talked about narrative as fiction. So he says that fictional hypertext it can twist the author-reader relationship such that illustrative hypertext, for example, if I'm talking about illustrative hypertext like a website, for example. So now that website has a very different kind of purpose. It is supposed to instruct or maybe educate or provide you information on something. A fictional hypertext is more narrative based. That it is supposed here, I'm using this word with a lot of caution. It is supposed to tell you a story. So fictional hypertext here, he says, is different from other hypertext in the form that it cannot be classified. Okay, its tragedies cannot be classified, and at the end he says that linearity does not disappear fully but appears in other narrative forms. So if you get a question like, are hypertextual fiction linear in any way, so now you know your answer, that yes, they are linear in some, they are linear to some degree. They are linear because they have a certain kind of linearity which cannot be omitted, because that linearity is an intrinsic and inherent part of language. Right, so in that way it cannot be omitted. But yes, hypertextual fiction is generally multidimensional and multilinear. So your answer just cannot be that hypertextual fiction is not linear, because linearity is something that we cannot take out of language. Right. Now are there any questions for this section? Is there anything you didn't understand? Any comments that somebody would like to make? Anything that you would want to talk about within this section? Okay, moving on. Next section. This is a very important section. Please mark this because we'll be reading this also. A lot of this section, this is a longer section, and the problem with this section is that a lot of it cannot be typed because there are long chunks of quotation. So we'll be reading through this. Keep your notes close. We have around 10, 5, 6 minutes, so we'll just get into it and do the rest tomorrow. Print anticipation of multilinear narratives in eSpace. Now, stay with me for this section, is very important. A writer of hypertext, he practices a second order writing because he has to walk a fine line between creating opportunities for the reader but also not closing other possibilities prematurely. What does this mean? What is second order writing? What is first order writing? So now first order writing is, I am writing something, for example, I wrote this presentation for you, or maybe I'm writing a creative piece, maybe you're writing a creative piece. What are you doing? You are an author, you don't have your reader in front of you right now, and you're just thinking, okay, I am supposed to tell this story to somebody and I will write it down in my own way and I will give it to the reader. Now the reader will be presented with a static, very stationary form of narrative, where the reader can go from one page to the next. Maybe if he comes to page number 20 and finds a point, he can go to page number 1 and check back. But apart from that, there is nothing a print text can do. Apart from flipping pages in a print text, you can't do anything. Now the problem with the hypertext is that you can do a lot of things with the hypertext. There are many links to follow. There are many narrative paths to follow. So this is second order writing. Second order writing is writing where the reader is also an author. As we discussed in the last section, the reader is a reader author. The reader is not only reading a piece of text but also making his own way through the text. And while he's making his own way through the text, he's creating his own narrative. Because he's creating his own narrative, he is an author. In that way, the writer of the hypertext or the author of a hypertext needs to practice second order writing. He has to maintain a very fine balance between what a reader is going to do and in between the path that the reader is going to take, and he has to give that reader a lot of possibilities, because hypertextual fiction is full of possibilities. It's infinite, right? It's supposed to be theoretically infinite, so therefore he needs to give the reader a lot of possibilities, but at the same time not he cannot close off different avenues, or he cannot close off different points of discussion. So it's a very fine line to walk. Kitna possibility dena hai aur kitni possibility nahi dena hai. Right, so that kind of balance is very important in second order writing, because here the reader is also an author. Okay. Now coming to the second point, how is this possible? How is this fine balance achieved? Why? Because this sorry, hypertextual fiction is not a closed or a unitary structure, but it is a structure of possible structures. This is an extremely important line. I've written the page numbers. When you read it, mark this. Very important. That hypertextual fiction is not a closed structure. We've talked about this, because hypertextual fiction is not a it's not a narrative. Sorry, it's not a linear function. Now you understood how hypertext hypertextuality is slightly linear. So whenever I say hypertextuality is not linear, don't be like मैम आपने बोला था linear है वो. मतलब just keep that in mind कि हाँ वो linear है, but when we're saying कि hypertextuality is not linear, we mean कि hypertextuality goes into different directions. Right. So because it is multilinear, therefore it is not a closed or it is not a unitary structure. It's not a singular structure, but it is a structure of possible structure. Again and again, and I was going to argue for the same point, which I'm sure you've been reading since the last semester. That hypertextuality is multidimensional. Hypertextuality is many layered. Hypertextuality is multilinear. It's the one and the same point, just in different words. Right. Now he says the followability of a story. Followability is a term which is used by Paul Ricoeur. Paul Ricoeur is a great, I wouldn't say great, but I would say fairly well-known deconstructionist. So he says he has given this term followability of a story can be encouraged through single directional linking or bidirectional linking in fuller and freer forms of the medium. What does he mean by this? He means that story, what is a narrative? Basically a narrative is a collection of events that have a story between them, right? So you go from point A and you go from point B, right? You go to point C, right? So what is this? This is everything follows everything else. There is something which will happen in the beginning, something which will happen in the middle, something which happens in the end. Why do we have the beginning, middle, end? Because a beginning is followed by a middle and a middle is followed by an end. Even when you're writing an essay or an article, you follow an introduction, body, conclusion. What is that? It's a following. It's a procedure which follows. One section follows the other section. Connection hota hai us cheez ke बीच में. This is what he means by followability. He says कि now the followability of a story is not only present in hypertextual fiction. It can happen in single directional linking also. Single directional linking in the sense that maybe one block of text has only one link, or maybe one block of text is only pushing you in one direction. That would be single directional linking, or bidirectional linking in the sense that a form of text might provide you with many links, which is present in fuller and freer forms of the medium. Fuller and freer forms of the medium, like the story that we discussed in the first section, Michael Joyce ka jo tha, Afternoon or Story. So that kind of story which has, two kind of narratives. One where the person is just witnessing a car accident, the other where the person is witnessing is might be thinking that his wife and his son might have died in that accident. So in that bi-directional form of linking also, this kind of direction is possible. So these 3 points concern the writing of a hypertext. Tomorrow, as I see it's 12:25, so tomorrow we'll talk about the rest of the section, the beginning and the end of the section, and what is the beginning of a hypertextual narrative like, what is the end of a hypertextual narrative like. Do you have any questions for me right now?
Excuse me.
Yeah, Rahul.
But can we say that the hypertext, it might be linear or multilinear, it might be debatable, but it never is going to be out of context. Like there might be a number of series in the hypertext, but these series must be in a sequential order.
No, we can't say that, because that is exactly the point he's trying to make, that those links do not need to be in a sequence. They might be in a sequence, they might not be in a sequence. But hypertextual fiction means nothing needs to be in sequence. Also, we cannot say that hypertextual is linear or multilinear, because wahan ka question nahi hai. What I'm saying is, and please listen to this carefully, that hypertextual fiction is always multilinear and linear. It is both. It is never a question of or. Hypertextual fiction is multilinear because it goes in different directions. It is also linear because within that one direction, it is moving in that direction. Right. It's a difficult point to understand. You can only understand if you look at examples. In a singular block of text, it is moving from one direction to the other direction. It is giving you one story, one narrative. In that sense, it is linear. But because it is also giving you multi-direction, therefore it is multi-directional. Never say that it is multilinear or linear. That point is not debatable. It is both. This is the point that Landau is making from the beginning, that hypertextual fiction cannot be categorized. It cannot be classified. It cannot be either or. When we say things like either or in regard to hypertextual fiction, we're going against what Landau has argued. Because from the beginning, he's saying that hypertext is diverse. It is everything. It is this and that. It is never this or that. Okay? Is this clear?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, is there any specific limit on the multilinearity of the hypertext?
No, there is not. This is a good question. There is not, because there is no limit to the multidimensionality and multilinearity of the hypertext. This is why hypertext fiction is theoretically infinite. That is the point Landau here made, that hypertext fiction, and Coover also says this, is theoretically infinite because there is no limit to this multidimensionality. There is no limit to how many pages you can have on the internet. This is not, this is not printing this on paper, which would make it finite. But because this is digital, because it is always on the web, there is no possibility of it stopping at any point. Any other questions?
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, I'm going to stop the class here now, and I want you to read the next section, the one that we're discussing, the print anticipation of multilinear narratives in eSpace. It's a very important section, one from where you'll get like a lot of questions, which will form the basis of our discussion into the next chapters. So into the next parts of this chapter. So please make sure that you read it, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.